A very good afternoon to all those who found time in their busy day to join us for this very important Premier's Digicon. Today's Digicon will focus on the burning issue of safety, levels of crime fueled by gangsterism, and more recently, tensions that continue to plague and hamper the taxi industry have had devastating consequences for far too many of our residents in this province and communities in the Western Cape. Western Cape and its partners all jointly condemn this violence, and we are exercised by the need to do something to do more. While there is a lot going on behind the scenes and on our streets and our roads in our communities, we do acknowledge that much more still needs to be done. And that is the thrust, that is the meat of this Digicon. We will look at the critical importance of building and developing collaboration and partnerships to tackle crime, and specifically gangsterism and organized crime. Now, just prior to this Digicon, there was a meeting of the Western Cape Provincial Safety Council. This is a body that comprises multiple stakeholders, among them the South African Police Service and municipalities, as well as private sector partners. And they're all exercised with one objective, and that's to make this province safer and more prosperous. Before I introduce our panel, if you'll just allow me to go through our normal house rules for the duration of the Digicon, that's the presentations and the engagements between our panelists. If those joining us online could please keep their cameras and their microphones muted. I will then indicate at what point we'll be taking questions from the media. You can also remember that this is on the Premier's social media platform. So if you'd prefer to post your questions or pose your questions through X or other platforms, feel free to do so. And of course, there is the chat box where you can pose those questions. But if you choose to rather send those questions to me directly, I will be sure to put my details in the chat box, WhatsApp details, and you can send those questions through there. Right, let's get to our panel. Of course, to my left is the Premier of the Western Cape, Mr. Alan Winde, the Western Cape Minister of Police Oversight and Community Safety, Ms. Anroux Marais, and then our special guest today, Mr. Mark Shaw, the Executive Director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Without any further ado, I'll hand over to the Premier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regan, and good afternoon. Welcome to this Digicon, a serious issue that faces so many of our residents in our region, specifically across the Cape Flats, one of crime, one of gangsterism and violence that goes with gangsterism, and of course what we've seen in the last while, some very serious taxi violence as well. All of these together really putting a lot of pressure on the residents across our region. And, we've got to make sure that we find ways to build a safer province. I want to say that at the onset, it was really good to see the city of Cape Town as they've put in their budget and spoken about the new officers that they are deploying in a similar vein to the safety plan, where we have partnered with the city with deployment of LEAP officers to crime hotspots. They are deploying more officers into each ward across the city, which really will make a difference. So 700 of those officers passing our parade yesterday, and they will be deployed very, very soon. And I'm sure that is also going to add as a force multiplier and make a difference to our residents. I also wanted to say that I'm very encouraged. We have a new acting minister, and when I spoke to him last week, raising a few issues, he said he would definitely be coming to visit. We have seen him on the ground in the province yesterday, today again, and tomorrow we will be having formal meetings with the minister. And I'm looking forward to that because we have to do this together. We cannot do this in silos. We've got to actually have a look at how we can bring about new technologies and innovations, how we can create a platform where all role players, three spheres of government, civil society, how business, how all of the players in the criminal justice system come together to find solutions and to create safer environments for our residents. I want to say that I've just come out of the Safety Council along with the Minister next to me, and it's really good to see all of government there, from SAPS and their presentations to all of the departments, to the city, to municipalities, to Department of Public Prosecutions, to the criminal justice system represented through our prisons and issues raised through there, but to business. They're also in the room, making sure that at a platform level we are talking with one voice. We are talking together in finding solutions. So I think there are a lot of actions happening, and we've got to make sure we pull all of these together, because if we don't work together, we will continue on the same vein that we've seen. We really believe in this province. We've been calling for it for a long time on devolution of power. It actually means doing something differently. And how do we engage and find a new way of fighting crime, using technology and data that has not existed before, how our systems talk together to find ways on remedying this criminal system that is really needing to be addressed urgently in our province. So I really welcome this platform. We can come back to you as citizens as to what is happening, and then of course zoom in on a couple of the really special areas of focus and partnership. And of course, that's why it's also really nice to have Mark Shaw here. And I'm looking forward to his contribution, and how a lot of the work that they've been doing in our region has also shown really good positive movements. So welcome to this Digicon, and hopefully we can have a nice engagement, and we can get some of those questions answered, but also put on the table some of the plans that are being rolled out, and how we are tackling crime in a new and different way, and improving every single day as we move forward.
Thank you, Premier. I'll now hand over to Minister Marais. Minister Marais will be walking us through a presentation that will focus very much on what's called the Policing Needs and Priorities Report. It's an annual report. It's a legislative obligation by the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety to draw up this report. And basically, in crude terms, it's aimed at helping the South African Police Service as well as municipal law enforcement to do their jobs better. It is rich with all kinds of recommendations, from resourcing to methodologies in fighting crime. And so I'll now hand over to the Minister, and she'll walk us through some of the more important salient points in the 2025 version of that report. Over to you. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Regan, and good afternoon to all our viewers. Although POCS, that's our Police Oversight Community Safety Department, does not hold operational control over SAPS, our power lies in policing influence, particularly through research-based, evidence-driven recommendations. And, you know, the PNP reflects our oversight role, bridging the gap between the lived realities of our communities and the policy frameworks that determine policing outcomes. And I'm only giving a brief overview of all the oversight and data that we've got from this report. It is the PNP is grounded in Section 206 in the Constitution, and it empowered the province specifically for police oversight, our police conduct. And then the purpose of the PNP report is most important instrument in shaping the policing agenda, influencing national resource allocation, and ensuring that voices of communities are heard in the fight for a safer province. And it is very important to know also that this report will be released to the public, so you can through that, and we're all open for discussion and questions. Then the 2025-26 focus is reviewing SAP's uptake of the 2019-24 recommendations. It's very important for us. We did some recommendations, and to see if these recommendations were implemented by SAPs between 2019 and 2024. Then the key findings that we find from 2019 to 2024, all of us know that the budget and resources is very underfunded, and that is one of our biggest problems, and the chronic underfunding despite the high crime in our province. And the recommendation is equitable funding based on crime levels. Then also human resources. The SAP staff dropped despite the population growth. There were 20,000 almost police officers in 2016, and in 2022 it's only 18,000, and the population grew by 11.8%. And then also a ratio as high as 1.962 in our hotspots. So it's one police officer for 962 citizens. And it is far above the country's rate of 1.417. And the recommendation is also fill the vacancies, improve training, and revise the HR model. Then our infrastructure and equipment stations is in disrepair. We've got vehicle shortages, and the recommendation is also upgrading of facilities. That's a very difficult one. Decentralized servicing and modernized tech. And then the deployment. The most murders happen on weekends, 6 p.m. until 3 a.m. in the morning. Almost 70% of murders happening this time. And we must deploy based on crime data. And some progress were made with our LEAP officers. I must say I'm very thrilled with our LEAP officers, and also a rural flying squad in our specifically hotspot areas. Then gang and organized crime, 90% of gang murders is in the Western Cape. I just want to mention Mufuleni over the weekend was 31 murders, and that is terrible to see what happened in a time frame of a week, almost over 2 weekends. And the recommendation is fully resourced anti-gang unit, intelligence ops, and then our firearm control. That's one of our priorities, to look at the firearm control, illegal firearms, and the supplier, who's the supplier, and also about the ammunition. Then the gender-based violence. The recommendation there is that we must train officers to handle our victims better and conduct them better at the police stations, and improve the victim-friendly rooms. Then also substance abuse, alcohol and drugs fuel violence, specifically with gender-based violence over weekend. And then the PNP reports have recommended reinstating the K9 units for more drug K9 officers, and also for more drug units. And then our specialized units, POP units, is under-equipped. So we must equip them, improve SAP's municipal collaboration. I think we've done some good work with that so far. And then some of the PNP recommendations conflicted with SAP's policies and practices. We're not just identifying needs, but tracking the implementation. That's very important for us. And the Western Cape government will continue using this mechanism to hold stakeholders accountable, advocate for equitable policing, and pursue a shared vision of safer communities. I just want to mention that one of the biggest problems that we find in our communities, there's a strained relationship between SAPs and various communities, and it hampers the implementation of the PNP recommendations. And then the physical environment, the urban design of certain areas presents unique challenges when attempting to implement the PNP recommendations. And then the benefit of recommendations, you can just go through that. The one that I want to mention, the SAPS continues to caution that some recommendations extend beyond its mandate, particularly those relating to immigration, infrastructure, or broader socio-economic condition, making them more difficult to act on directly. And lastly, the growing complexity of crime and safety challenges in the Western Cape requires a highly coordinated, integrated approach. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Some salient and important information in that report indeed. We'll now hand over to our special guest. I've introduced him already, but those who've joined us a bit late, Mr. Mark Shaw is the Executive Director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. It's an organization that does incredibly important work in, for example, monitoring gangsterism at a almost granular level, and trying to better understand the scourge and the trends that surround this historical scourge, it must be said. So, Mr. Shaw, welcome to our Digicon, and we'll hand over to you for your inputs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Regan. Premier Minister, it's a pleasure to be here in the Western Cape. I wanted to say just very quickly what we do, talk about a very specific pilot project that we've been talking a lot to the Western Cape government about, and then maybe say one or two things about at least what we or I think is essential to an anti-gang organized crime strategy more broadly in our work generally. First point to make is I'm running a global organization, but I'm from South Africa, so I have a stake here too, and I'm very happy to be part of the process. We're the biggest organized crime think tank, illicit economy, organized crime think tank in the world. We have 140 analysts. We have lots of people on the ground doing work, as Regan says, and they are organized in observatories around the world. And we have 14 observatories, and those are people working in some of the toughest places around the world. For example, Haiti, Latin America, other parts of Africa, Asia, and the like. And we have an observatory in Cape Town, and we are very proud of that. And we have excellent staff here, and we very much feel part of the debate that takes place here in the Western Cape. We are doing as an organization globally 4 things. Regan alluded to this. Firstly, analysis, and we pride ourselves on the granularity. So we are collecting information, and I want to emphasize a bit later why that's so important. Secondly, convening and bringing people together to talk about solutions to organized crime. Thirdly, we are funding hundreds of projects around the world, and including some here in the Western Cape. I'll mention one, and that's about building resilience amongst communities to gangs and organized crime. And finally, I'm not going to cover that in a great deal of detail. We are ourselves running several projects around the disruption of illicit economy. So I think this is a very important point, and it's, if you like, a trend or a future trend in our own work. One point to make, Premier Minister, is, of course, that it's not only the Western Cape globally that is afflicted with organized crime and gangsterism. And in my own travels and work, this is a huge challenge globally. And there's a lot of lessons to learn from what people are doing around the world. I think, in fact, a good comparison for South Africa is parts of Latin America, parts of Brazil. But the extent to which organized crime has grown in the last couple of decades is extraordinary. And how it is changing, how it is mutating is critical for us to understand. Here in South Africa, we have a very good team, and we have been working to highlight the extent of organized crime here. And our message has been that we need a strategic joined-up response. And in September 2022, we published a high-level risk assessment of organized crime, and we briefed whoever would listen, Western Cape government, national government, etc. And at least initially, I think people were reluctant to accept that South Africa had such a serious problem with organized crime. We do a global index, and South Africa is number 7 on that index. And South Africa fits on the index with very high levels of organized crime. Why is that? Because it performs badly across a range of markets, but also relatively high resilience, institutional and societal capacity to respond. So South Africa fits in a category along with a number of other countries, Colombia, Mexico, Italy, and we need to recognize that in South Africa we have a serious challenge. And as the Premier said, we need to work together, bringing all the resources we can in a coordinated way to have a response. You may have seen our initial reporting, or some of our most high-profile reporting, was done around extortion. So we have done several reports around extortion. We have a quarterly gang monitor here in the Western Cape, and a number of other reports that we produce. Our view is that a lot of the issues around organized crime, there is simply not enough information. And we think that our comparative advantage, of course, we are only one small component of many people responding to organized crime, is to get that information out there. In our 160 reports a year, most of them are public, and we do have confidential annexes, etc., that we brief governments and others on the extent of organized crime. But our objective is to shine a light on it and take the crime of extortion. People who engage in extortion want that to stay hidden. And our objective, I think, is to get the information out there. That highlights also, of course, the role of civil society, the media around the world responding to organized crime. We are also very eager globally, but to some degree, as our resources allow, to support civil society organizations building resilience in communities. And what we mean by that is to strengthen the capacity of local communities to respond to the pressures that organized crime brings. And it's no secret here in the Western Cape that organized crime has legitimacy. And how do you break that legitimacy? How do you prevent people from being recruited? For example, we run a project here called Maths Moms, which is an unbelievable project. It's moms teaching young kids maths so that they are not recruited into gangs. And it's this kind of thing that I think is super important, not only to be supported by government, but civil society, business, in terms of making sure that there is a resilient community out there. One of the big advantages of the Western Cape is that it has a very rich, often contested, but very rich religious, civil society, and obviously journalistic sector. And I can't emphasize from my own experience how important it is to protect that sector and to make sure that it stands up to gangs and criminal activities both through practical but also very symbolic ways. Now, we didn't only want to constantly publish how bad things are, and it is indeed, we, as I said, want to put that information out there. But in speaking to the police and the provincial government and other counterparts here in the Western Cape, we wanted to do something practical and something that could be grown incrementally across the province, and we hope also with the support of Business Against Crime across the country as a whole. And one of the things that started to emerge from speaking to prosecutors and police and community groups was that gang-related murders at local station level, the dockets were simply not being prosecuted. And the message that came back was actually the statements are often of a pretty poor quality. And prosecutors say, well, we can't read the statements, so the case could be thrown out, or the elements of the crime are not present, or the police officer doesn't have the legal experience, or et cetera, et cetera. So this idea that the quality of the legal documentation in the statements, very practical issue, could be improved. And why is that important before I go on to say why we have done that? Firstly, we want to respond to the issue of gangs. There's a populist upsurge around the world. You can think of El Salvador, for example, where we should throw all gang members in prison, where we should suspend the rule of law, etc. That's not the way to go for the long term. But what do you need? You fundamentally need the framework of the rule of law to do that. And what is the bottom line of the rule of law? It's the legal process, and the statements are the very bottom line, the smallest thing you need to be able to run a process which is constitutional and within the framework of the rule of law. And it's fundamental to democratic policing, absolutely fundamental. And so we thought a lot about, well, what could we do in a practical way? We also talked to the SAPS, to the Provincial Commissioner, General Patekile, who was very open, I think, to understanding or to seeing where we could work together. We had discussions with the Premier and the Minister. And our idea was to put experienced legal practitioners as a pilot into one station. And the station where we started was Grassy Park, where we had done a very detailed survey, which had been funded by the European Union, about the challenges of Grassy Park. So we knew a lot about the volume of murders, the nature of organized crime, the nature of policing in Grassy Park. And so we employed a former defense lawyer who is very good with people. Her permanent job is to be in the service center in Grassy Park and assist with the drafting of statements. And that's where we began. So support with legal expertise and mentorship, improve the casework quality, enhance day-to-day efficiency, engage in legal training. So really make sure that in that station, the quality of the statements improves. What we found very quickly, Premier Minister, I think you would relate to this, is that we had originally said, okay, focus only on gang-related murders, attempted murders. It soon became very clear that our deployed lawyer started to deal with all sorts of issues around service delivery. And it's a reminder the degree to which policing is the front end of the state. People, domestic violence, people with issues, personal issues, etc., etc. This very busy service center. And our instructions to her have been, okay, we have a mandate for organized crime, but we want to build the trust and the legitimacy of the police. So expand what you are doing to improve the service. And we are monitoring very closely the comments that we get back from people who have engaged with Jackie, the lawyer who is working in Grassy Park. And we are hopeful that we are starting to make something of a difference. Now, we would really like to expand that project, and we've been talking to the Premier and the Minister about support to do that, and we're very grateful for those discussions. I think the idea to be more innovative, I really think, and as a South African myself who have written on organized crime and gangsterism in the Cape, we do need to start doing things differently. This simply cannot continue. And it's, I think, reached a point, a kind of crisis, and in every crisis is opportunity. And we need to drive forward this idea of a collaborative approach amongst a range of constituents. And our aim would be to expand the project to 10 stations if necessary, wherever there is a need to employ people and place them in the stations. And we and I have been talking to business, and I think many business constituents are very, very eager. The Premier hosted a fundraising meeting with the business, and it was a closed meeting, but it was very good opportunity for people to try and understand what they want to do. And my impression is that people want to do practical stuff, and to find practical projects which are new is the key to what we are hoping for. Now, it's been suggested to me, I spoke to a senior police officer in Pretoria the day before yesterday, that in fact we should do more training amongst front-end legal and other personnel within SAPS. And I think we need to take that seriously, that we can't just limit to a number of stations. Perhaps we need to widen our training. And I'm very, very grateful for the SAPS, who I think have stepped up. I think initially they were worried that it was a criticism of how they were doing work. Police agencies around the world, I think, don't want people poking around their business. I understand that. And to have an outsider in a police station, I think, is an important achievement collectively, not just us, but in setting up the project. Regan, with your permission, I conclude very quickly to say 6 things generally from our own experience that we think you need to respond to organized crime. And I'll be very brief, but I wanted the opportunity to say that. The first is political will. And in all of our engagements and my engagements around the world, the sense of putting aside differences is hugely important. And the issue about different levels of government is not, and disputes, etc., between city, province, state, and federal, is not just a South African phenomenon. It occurs everywhere. And this idea of all pulling together, using all the resources that we have. And in my own opinion, the Police Act was written in 1994 for a particular environment, and we should seriously consider how we can adapt to use all the resources that we can to do things differently. And I hope that is the subject of the discussion with Minister Kachalia. The second is to have a clear and simple strategy where everybody is involved. And I sense that that's not really present collectively. And I think we really do need to do that better. That relies on information, but it also relies on intelligence, and the sense that the intelligence system has broken down, and we need to fix it if we are going to counter organized crime. The third is said all the time, and that is that it is important to undermine the money collecting abilities of what are essentially business enterprises. And I think the tax and revenue collection authority is absolutely key in every country in the world. And I know SARS is interested in doing more. And in this context, I think it is very, very important. Fourth, we need independent, not politically tainted investigations. And generally, our and my experience of success in responding to organized crime is you need to bring in outside investigators. And I have been talking to stations here and I've seen interview material. You know, police officers are either scared of being threatened, gangs know where their kids go to school, etc. But at the same time, there's also corruption at local station level. So you often need to intervene from the outside if you are to respond effectively to the challenge of organized crime and gangs. Fifth point, I know the government is seized on that. You mentioned the homicide rate, Minister. Reduce violence. That means ground coverage, numbers of police patrolling, domination of areas, but it also means removing guns from the street, not only here, but elsewhere. And finally, and I think the provincial government has a hugely important role to play in this area, it's my last point, is to build resilience. To reduce the legitimacy, as I have said, of gangs. That means politicians not meeting people affiliated to gangs, cutting gangs and gang leaders off, showing that society, in a sense, rejects them. The role of civil society, I've already mentioned, local organizations. Simple things like the occupation of space, the spraying out and coverage of graffiti, theater and other things seem soft. But in places like Mexico and elsewhere where we work, these are very powerful symbolic responses to gangsterism, which is about controlling ground and controlling people's activities. And then to reduce inequality and prevent recruitment. So this focus on youth is key. And I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Hugely informative. Thanks, Mr. Shaw. And I love that. We're not poking into other people's business, we're helping. And it's a two-way street. And I think we can all learn from that. Right, we'll open the floor to questions now. And just to remind you, you can post those questions in the chat box, or you can post them on the Premier social media pages. And just to note, I have received a few questions already, and I'll work through them one by one. And if you could also just indicate who your questions are directed towards. If you don't do that, then I'll just open it to the panel generally, or I'll decide for myself who's best placed, or ask who's best placed to respond to those questions. So the first question that's come to the fore here: how do the Western Cape provincial priorities, this PNP report, align with the relatively new acting Minister of Police, Kachalia's message? And what opportunities does this visit in the province, he's been quite busy over the past few days, create for stronger cooperation between national and provincial government? I think reading between the lines here, I think it's also, is this an acknowledgement from a new political leader, a new minister, that we've got a major problem? He has to come here, he has to see it for himself, he has to gather that information with his colleagues, and perhaps work closer with the provincial government, with municipalities in this province. So maybe if we could start, Premier, no indication of who that's directed towards, but maybe you can start us off, and Minister, if you've got any additions to that. And of course, Mr. Shaw, you're welcome to come in afterwards. Premier.
Thank you very much. I mean, obviously, I'm really happy that, I managed to have a direct conversation with him. I've met and worked with him before in previous portfolios when he was part of the Gauteng government. So, I mean, we've worked together before. That makes it a lot easier. My conversation was directly related to the MOU that we signed just over a year ago with the president, with the then new minister in a new term, which I think in a GNU government, which really was exciting. We're now going to move forward. There are a lot of areas in that MOU that I was very frustrated with. And in actual fact, I'd already communicated with Minister Mchunu before he was suspended or moved aside, that we really need to zoom in because we're not moving on these indicators. And Minister Kachalia now said, let's pick up on that. Let's find out where it's not working. And so I think that's very encouraging. And he said, we're going to have to try something else. I mean, at the same time, we're in an environment where there's a commission of inquiry now into policing and what's happening. It is the perfect time to say, all right, now let's buckle down. Let's make sure that across our country we start to bring in new things that work. And so obviously coming back to what our constitutional mandate is and what Minister Marais' department does, and they produce this document every year called the Policing Needs and Priorities document. That is what we are supposed to do according to the Constitution. In the province, we have oversight of what happens in policing. But I mean, that's got to change. That's why we need to be much more involved. We've got to do things differently. And that's why we're calling for regulatory and legislative changes and innovation and bringing all of that together. But this document really starts to outline every single police station, what the shortfalls are, where we need improvement, overall what our analysis is on visiting every one of these stations, what our analysis is of what has to be done. This is part of the environment where this document now becomes something that you formally hand over to the Minister and the National Police Commissioner, because that is how we start a conversation. But I think that, we've actually moved on beyond just this document because of the work that we're doing, and because of, I think, what Mark was talking about now. These interventions that start to give us results, we've got to say, how do we double up, keep measuring, keep analyzing? And I think, it really is an exciting project in Grassy Park, where you saw kind of a little bit of apprehension, and now you've built this trust model between this legal mind and the police themselves, and you've got a trust model with civil society, with the community. Now, surely that says, wow, how do we then, and I mean, the real test now is going to be the consequences of crime. So this is going to lead us to actually getting our court processes, not to throw cases out, to actually start to bring about cases that actually have their day in court, which is for me going to be a fundamental change to the data points we see at the moment, which are, so few cases actually end up getting seen in a court of law. They get thrown out along the way. And then, I could speak for a long time on investigations, but I'm not going to hog that space. It's also something that we're going to have a serious conversation with the Minister tomorrow about.
Minister, any suggestions from your side?
Thank you. No, thank you for the question. And I just I agree fully with our Premier. And as Premier always said, we have to crack down on this crime. And our Acting Minister, Prof. Chalia, is very eager to speak to the Premier. We will see him tomorrow, I think Thursday afternoon. And he wants us to think out of the box, be innovative, work together, because it's not only a problem for Western Cape, it is also for South Africa, to make South Africa resilient and safe. So thank you.
Mark, any input from you? Perfect. I think we've covered it all there. SABC, Mariska, you have a question. Over to you. Thank you.
For Premier and Minister, we've heard of another fatal shooting this morning, 6 people. The occurrences are becoming closer and closer and closer together. Ourselves as teams in our office has covered so many of them in the last several months. In Kraaifontein in particular this morning, the Neighbourhood Watch says LEAP officers were extracted from the area. There were no LEAP officers in the area. Could you speak to perhaps how LEAP officers, how decisions are made about where and how LEAP officers are deployed? And then for Mr. Shaw, if I may, you mentioned a lot of things that is needed. If there is one thing at this critical point in time, because the uptick in gang-related violence in this province has just exploded. Yep. If there's one thing that must be done now, without any hesitance from anyone, what is that one thing?
Can I go first? I'm actually going to listen to what Mark's answer is, and then I'm going to give you what my answer would be for that as well. Yeah. I'm not sure if Minister Marais can actually talk about the deployment, because we have focused LEAP officers into a deployment of 6 areas. There's also a reaction unit, so I'm not too sure exactly, but we track every single one of those officers so we can see exactly where they are at any given time. Our biggest problem is that our resourcing of police has decreased dramatically. So in 2019, when I first became the Premier and we started to devise some new way, and that's where the safety plan came from, we had 20,000 officers deployed to this region. We now have 13,000. So crime has gone up, the deployment has gone down. So we've added to that another 1,200 LEAP officers. And now yesterday, really exciting to see the city now, another 700 officers. It's a separate model, but similar to LEAP, but it's a separate model where those 700 are going to be deployed across every single ward in the city itself. These are all active force multipliers. But in the real big picture, we have far less boots on the ground than we had 6 years ago. So that's the first problem. The second problem is not only just the deployment of our officers, it's where they're deployed, how they're deployed, and then how are they resourced. So we spoke earlier about just supporting them from a legal point of view in a police station. There are a whole plethora. That comes out of the PNP. And it'll say, this specific station has got so many vehicles and they've got 1 million kilometers on each of the vehicles, or the radios don't work, or the phone lines aren't connected. It really does that kind of depth of analysis of what the shortfalls are, so that we can actually then start to say, this is how we think we should address them.
Thank you. Can I go first?
Yes.
Thank you, Premier. I don't want to add a lot to what Premier said. What happened is that with the surge in killings or murders on the Cape Flats, we've started with, SAP started with Operation Chanela 2.0. So they took some of our LEAP officers to the hotspot areas. So some of the LEAP officers were withdrawn, 200 from each station were withdrawn to put them in the hotspot areas. So Kraaifontein is also a hotspot area, but there's less LEAP officers. And the other thing that's difficult for us, the crime intelligence is not good. And that is one of our biggest problems with other, but because of the crime intelligence, you really don't know what is happening, what is coming next. So that is a big concern for us, and also for SAPS. They said it's also a concern for them. And there's one detective with almost 200, a caseload of 200. That is very difficult. So, but where the LEAP office is deployed, even though the crime looks terrible and it's up, but in those areas it decreases because of the LEAP officers. Thank you.
Mariska, I firstly to say there's often no immediate silver bullets in cases like this. And I think it's worth saying, because politicians and others, I'm not pointing at the two nice people on my right, are under pressure to deliver immediately. But these are very, very problems that are generations in the making. But I think the key thing to do is to move from a reactive to a proactive strategy. And that's what we've never been able to do here and elsewhere in the world. And we constantly react to shootings, and as depressing as they are, we are always on the back foot reacting. And one of the challenges is, as soon as the violence goes away, the deployments or the resources go away, but organized crime, it doesn't go away. And so this idea of changing how we think, I think, is key. And that change in thinking, I think, is based on essentially three things. The first is the intelligence. And I must say, I think this is a huge weak spot here. There simply isn't the intelligence to be proactive. And to build an intelligence system that works takes time. And in the interim, I'm afraid the solution is a bit reactive. You've got to dominate the space in which gangs are, and that means boots on the ground. But that's a temporary solution. And so this idea of building a proper intelligence picture to move towards a proactive response, and you need a systematic way in which the government or levels of government look at that and respond to that, and you need a strategy which has clear leadership with everybody around the table being part of it. To be honest, this can be beaten. It can, and it is shown to be possible, but you've got to do these basic things, and you've got to reduce conflict between different levels of government, and you've got to have a strategy. which is based on information. Just to emphasize, it's both strategic information, where are things happening, how are they happening, but also, of course, tactical intelligence, so you can do something about it. I guess that would be my answer.
Sure, if we could actually keep the camera on, Mr. Shaw. The question has just come through, and these two questions, in fact, and we'll have to wrap it up after this. But for Mr. Shaw, what is the impression of the role that armed forces, in other words, the Defence Force, should be playing in fighting gang violence in hotspots such as the Cape Flats? Is there evidence that this has helped in other countries or could be beneficial, for instance, as a force multiplier for police? Or should it rather be avoided at all costs?
There's two, or should I just go straight on to
I think we should take it one by one.
So
we'll deal with this one first.
So this is a big debate in the environment where I work. And I think the simple question is, and the same applies to issues around state of emergencies and the like. The simple question, the answer is, if things really do get out of hand and you cannot provide ground coverage, then military forces are an option. But they are a last resort, I have to say. And generally, militaries are not designed to fight gangs and organized crime. And indeed, I think many military officers do not want to deploy because they worry about corruption and a range of other issues related to it. So I think the answer is yes, but they are a temporary solution to provide ground coverage. The issue that are outlined, but they are not the permanent solution. Mm-hmm. The problem is, I think, that they are part of a reactive solution because it's very, very visible. And indeed, because you can cover an area with large numbers of people, you can make a difference. My own view is that as long as you've got enough police, or if you can scale up your policing responses, you should avoid the deployment of the military.
And the concluding question, once again directed towards you, Mr. Shaw, you mentioned the importance of removing guns as being one of those 6 key interventions to address organized crime. Please, can you explain a bit more what this entails regarding illegal guns already in circulation, as well as steps to prevent diversion?
A couple of points very briefly. The way to remove guns, in my view, is to provide very strong incentives, resourcing, and structures to the police to do so. And key to removing guns is intelligence. Yes, guns are picked up in roadblocks, often reasonably large numbers, but again, it returns to very targeted intelligence around the collection of firearms. The second issue, we in our gang monitor, which came out on Monday, an older story, but it's a story that's been ongoing, is flows of guns from Namibia. Yep. And in my own experience, what gangs and organized crime want is bulk supplies of guns. Where do you get bulk supplies? You get them from the state. You get them from private security companies, etc. Bulk supplies of guns need to be secured, and these are guns bought with taxpayers' money. Now, we all know the Prinsloo case in the Western Cape. We all know that some of those guns are still on the street. Guns don't just disappear, and we shouldn't forget that those were guns that were bought with taxpayers' money. Why the importance of the destruction of weapons that have been seized. So the bulk supplies of guns need to be secured.
Perfect.
Great. We've run out of time. So I just wanted to, first of all, say in closing to Mark, thank you very much. I'm really glad that you were here in person and we weren't bringing you in online. And it is always great to listen to you. And I look forward to working even closer with you and the Global Initiative, because what you bring are those people that are in the analytic space, looking at globally what's happening, where something works and how can we replicate it. And hopefully through these lessons, we can also pass on some of our lessons to other parts of the world as we build a safer society. And Minister, thank you very much as well. Perhaps I wanted to say, and I said to Mariska's question, what would I do? Well, I would do on day one is I would give a direct order to correct the policing to population ratio. Although we have far too few, if you do the analysis in that policing needs and priorities, you'll see the real crime hotspots has got less police officers to population than some of the areas that have got, less crime. Now, that's unacceptable, and I would do that immediately. Then I think the next two things, and it's been mentioned here, it's about intelligence and detectives. I mean, we've got to get them in place. But overall, the real stuff that's got to happen is violence prevention, because we've got to build a society that is tackling those issues from the school kid stage. And there's a really interesting, and maybe at the future Digicon, we can actually get the department to come from the Department of Health and Wellbeing to talk about the Planet Youth Project. I think from an analysis point of view, 13-year-olds in our province, of the 51,000 13-year-olds at school, 49,000 of them have been interviewed. And this is we've also borrowed this from Iceland. It's an international model where we're actually starting to get to what is it that influences their thinking, and how can we use this data to actually influence young people so that they go into a positive role in society instead of being drawn into crime. And so, these are the violence prevention things that you've also got to be focusing on while we're dealing with boots and investigations and intelligence, because you've got to build a safer society from the foundations up. But thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be back soon with another Digicon on something that's going to be really important to you, the resident of our province.